finding some mechanism that actually enables you to kind of be introduced by someone that actually is respected by the investors oftentimes ends up being the fastest, best way to kind of get to be seen and to kind of get evaluated. There needs to be a layer that actually abstracts as much of that regulation away from you. One of the interesting things in terms of what changed, I think one of the things that has changed is there is a new generation of consumer that kind of comes into the market roughly every 5-10 years, right? So as a new class of people that never use financial services become adults and actually start to use financial services. So when you look at every 10 years or so, consumer expectations keep changing.
The cloud is great. It solves a lot of real-world problems, but it's not just one cloud anymore. Public clouds, private clouds, edge clouds. The average business uses 5 different cloud providers. It's become chaotic and complex, with unpredictable costs, inconsistent security, multiple management tools, and different formats for workloads that span cloud platforms and providers. But it doesn't have to be that way. The Dell Technologies Cloud, powered by VMware, can be the one constant across your clouds. It brings consistent infrastructure and operations to your multi-cloud environment, so you can choose the right cloud for each application. A public cloud that lets you easily tap into services, a private cloud that's fully under your control, or the edge with cloud as a service. With a true hybrid cloud experience, your business becomes more agile with simple workload migration and easy onboarding for new assets. Your teams get to market faster. With simplified operations and automated processes, you reduce risk and strengthen your security profile. And with Dell Technologies Cloud, you have flexible consumption options, reducing your total cost of ownership. Like it or not, the business world often requires many clouds. Now, that's easier than ever, with consistent infrastructure, operations, and services across all your clouds. You get the cloud without the chaos. The Dell Technologies Cloud.
Prakash is the Chief Product Officer at Freshworks. In his role, he manages the overall product vision, strategy, development, and GTM efforts. Prior to Freshworks, he held senior leadership positions at Oracle as SVP of Product and GM. Before Oracle, he was the CPO at LifeLock, helping to propel the company through a successful IPO in 2012. Welcome, Prakash.
Thank you, and was a very formal introduction. Preeti and I work together at Freshworks, so thank you.
Yeah, and next I have the pleasure of introducing Shwark. Shwark makes early stage investments in fintech, security, and artificial intelligence. He's a serial entrepreneur, and he founded Yodlee and Truaxis. Both were acquired by large companies. Prior to that, Shwark held executive positions at LifeLock and MasterCard. He began his career at Microsoft after completing graduate school in computer science. He also has 15 patents. Shwark and Prakash, really excited. And over to you, Prakash.
Thank you, Preeti, and thank you all for joining, and special thanks to Shwark for making the time. So Shwark, what I thought I would do is just start off with kind of the elephant in the room, so to speak, when you're talking to a VC, which is, hey, how does funding work in this age of COVID? Where your business thrives on relationship building, networking, and looking the entrepreneur in the eye, so to speak, and they having a comfort level with you, and all of this now happening in virtual backgrounds and in Zoom. How does it work? And specifically, what is your feedback to entrepreneurs on what they should be doing different in this specific time? So I just want to kind of have that thing sort it out first before we go into some of your domain expertise.
As the world reopens, ServiceNow is helping customers make sure going back to the workplace works for everyone. Introducing the Safe Workplace apps and dashboard. 4 apps specifically designed to help ensure the health and safety of your workforce and workplace, all housed in a single dashboard to give you a comprehensive look into everything you need to know. And they're available now, out of the box, powered by the Now platform. Get a bird's eye view to make sure your employees are prepared and ready to go back to the workplace. Manage inventory levels across your organisation thanks to workflows that automatically replenish supplies. Screen and verify the health of your employees and help manage workflows for cleaning, sanitation and safe distancing for employees. 4 essential apps, 1 comprehensive dashboard. Together we can make sure going back to the workplace can work for everyone. That's the power of the Now platform.
Sure. Firstly, thanks for having me. I think it's great to be here. I think in terms of the environment, it is kind of uncharted territory for most people, VCs included. So I think it's an interesting new world we're living in. So I'd say that there is maybe no single answer. Everybody's trying to figure out how they're going to do things differently. What we're observing in terms of what actually is happening is that there are kind of like a tale of 2 worlds. One that has to do with later stage investing and one that has to do with earlier stage investing. We at Trinity, we're a $400 million fund investing primarily in A's and B's. So we are in the earlier end of the spectrum. And if you look at, when you go into a later stage rounds, C's, D's, E's, you will find that the bulk of the investment thesis is based on the performance of the company, based on the numbers, based on track record and history of execution and so on and so forth. So in those scenarios, just sitting in front of someone, having to look people in the eye is important, but is probably not the linchpin of the entire investment. The investment thesis is based much more so on the numbers and the performance of the businesses. And so it's much easier to continue to act in the current environment where you can still exchange files, you can still do the analysis, you can get on Zoom calls to do Q&A. And so you see a lot of traction in the later rounds. In fact, if you look at a lot of the dollars being deployed today, the bulk of the dollars that are actually being put to work are actually large deals, so large amounts of dollars into individual deals. And so the later stage stuff is actually, going just as fast or maybe even faster than usual. That's
almost like investing in the stock market, right? That once it's private data, you're getting it, you're looking at math to run it, right? So it's.
Yes, you could argue that it is actually closer to a public market type investing than, true venture scale investing. But of course, they are taking more venture risk than a typical public market investor does. But in this scenario, when we come to the very early stage, especially when you look at Series A's, for example, in our case, the bet becomes a lot more on the people and a lot more on the vision and so on and so forth. So it's a little bit harder to truly kind of build that relationship that typically lasts 7 to 10 years on a couple of Zoom calls. So that part of the venture ecosystem, I think, has slowed down quite a bit. It's starting to pick back up as we are finding ways of continuing to do this, start some conversations on Zoom, take long walks outside to kind of get to know entrepreneurs better. So things are kind of picking back up as we're all trying to adjust to the new reality that this might not just go back to normal tomorrow. So we're trying to find ways of continuing to make investments and achieve what we need to achieve in order to get comfortable confidence, which, by the way, most experienced entrepreneurs would like to know who they're going to spend time with in their board meetings for the next 7 to 10 years. So from all sides, it makes sense to kind of find ways, mostly through outdoor walking meetings these days, which are becoming very popular.
Okay, just to exit out of this, are there specific things that you would tell an entrepreneur should be doing differently in these times to get attention, mind share, and all of that? Or
so I don't know if the environment right now has actually made that all that different. In that, typically just given the barrage of unsolicited email that comes to any given venture firm, that never tends to be a very good way of kind of presenting something. Finding some mechanism that actually enables you to kind of be introduced by someone that actually is respected by the investors oftentimes ends up being the fastest, best way to kind of get to be seen and to kind of get evaluated. Oftentimes because the introducing party is actually almost forming a filter. So that is not that different today. In fact, given that everybody is online, it's actually become a little bit easier than before.
Okay, cool. So I want to shift gears a bit, just looking at the areas you invest in. I know you invest in infrastructure, you invest in security and fintech, but I just saw the previous panel spend a ton of time on containers and stuff. So just to mix it up, I want to focus on fintech, right? So as Preeti said, you founded Yodlee and you have a ton of experience with Yodlee, MasterCard, and so on and so forth. So help us understand this. There's suddenly a lot of buzz around fintech in the last couple of years, and banking has been around for a long time, and finance has been around. So what is changing fundamentally? What are the areas that excites you in this space? So if you could kind of give us a quick primer on fintech in 2020 and beyond, that'll be super helpful.
Sure. So I'd say that fintech has actually become very popular. One of the interesting things in terms of what changed, I think one of the things that has changed is there is a new generation of consumer that kind of comes into the market roughly every 5-10 years, right? So as a new class of people that never use financial services become adults and actually start to use financial services. So when you look at every 10 years or so, consumer expectations keep changing. And so the consumer expectations of the current generation that's entering the market is quite different, which effectively means there's an opportunity across the board for large institutions, small institutions, et cetera, to kind of create new products, new ways of interacting models with their consumers to actually capitalize on this new generation of consumer expectations. By the way, the fact that we're a lot more mobile first also kind of creates a whole bunch of new consumer expectation changes as well. So a couple of these tectonic shifts, I think, make it possible to come up with new sets of opportunities. Now, there are two broad ways you can go after it. One, which is to actually kind of go after what I'll call the incumbents, the very large, well-established financial institutions, and empower them to kind of get with the times. So how do you kind of give them the technologies, the infrastructure to kind of be able to service these new needs? And the other is to kind of create brand new brands, right? So basically say, look, they're never going to be able to get there. So we're just going to create a new bank or a new brokerage and so on and so forth. Both of these are actually becoming significant areas of investment, a lot of innovation. As you can see, you have a lot of neobanks and neo brokerages and all these other kinds of folks that are actually coming out with new products and services. And then you have, a lot of large banks investing heavily in technology in order to kind of become more competitive in the marketplace. One of the things that, if you kind of look forward, and that's kind of what's been happening and what's kind of been very interesting so far. As you look forward, I think what's very exciting and the kind of place where I've spent a lot of time because we're, of course, investing for the next 10 years, is what I think of as financial services being integrated into all kinds of other businesses. So think of financial services not as a destination product, but as an ingredient of another business model. So one of the things that you can see, for example, is financial services becoming the way that other businesses monetize. So enterprise software or SaaS software is being given away for free, but is being monetized through some financial services products and services that are embedded into these products, which I think is very exciting because it actually then moves the whole world forward, and that the move to SaaS software and so on and so forth is being effectively funded by financial services type product lines that are embedded into all of these other products.
Can you give an example of that? That's pretty interesting.
So one recent investment that I made is a company called Squire. Now, what Squire does is a barbershop ERP, for lack of a better word. So they actually create a full-blown end-to-end SaaS solution to run a barbershop. Everything from appointments and booking to ordering supplies, right? So think of the entire operating system of that store. But what's interesting is that they charge little to minimal fees for the software itself. It's a very small fee to kind of get in. the bulk of how they make money is actually to help them, create all this transaction flow, ordering the supplies, getting paid by the consumers, paying out their barbers, all the different flows of the money that goes through the shop, and all the financial products that are necessary to enable that is actually where the bulk of the monetization goes.
That's interesting. So one of the follow up on that, fintech is heavily regulated, right? So if I'm an entrepreneur, how do I look at that? When I start a company, I'm not really looking to deal with regulations, right? That's the last thing I want to do. So what's the hack to start a fintech company and not get caught in the midst of all these rules?
So excellent question. And actually, this is one of the reasons why. So when you look at the future where financial services is integrated into all these different products and services around, the first question that comes to mind is exactly what you just said, is like, wait, if I'm going to integrate all these financial services into my product, like what about all these regulations I have to be aware of? What is very interesting, and I think Stripe did this first, is there needs to be a layer that actually abstracts as much of that regulation away from you. So one of the things that Stripe did was actually not just made it easy for you to get a merchant account and so on and so forth. One of the most important things that they ever did was actually to get rid of your PCI compliance liability. So if you accept credit cards, even if you're a little store, you actually have to be PCI compliant, which comes with a whole bunch of things that you have to do, and you have to be compliant, and you have to do audits, and you have to do all these other things. What Stripe did is said, well, you never actually will even see the card number. So you, as who is accepting the cards, don't ever have to be PCI compliant, because we're just not even going to let you see the card itself. We'll take care of everything. So we're PCI compliant. You never have to be. And so what's interesting is that when you kind of create a model like that, which actually takes regulation away from the use of this solution, that actually enables a lot of innovation. And so another company I invested in is called Synapse, which basically has created a banking as a service product, which is again an API, much like what Stripe does for payments, but for all the rest of financial services. But again, the core thing that they're really doing there is not just providing API to banking, but really abstracting away all of the compliance and regulatory obligations that you have, taking those away by not having you be in the flow of all the information or whatever that needs to be done in order to make sure that you are not subject to as much of the regulation. So that's one aspect of things. The second aspect of things is there are some things that you simply cannot do unless you are regulated by the government. As an example, you cannot lend money that a consumer deposits with you. And if you look at the business model of most large banks, it's based on actually creating the spread between what they pay you as a consumer that's depositing money and what they lend the money out for your mortgage or auto loan or whatever else. Those spreads are pretty robust, very large spreads. And that's actually what makes these banks very, very profitable businesses. You cannot do that unless you're a regulated bank. Mm-hmm. So if you start a neobank, for example, you can't really be a very, very as profitable as the existing banks, because you cannot take all the deposits you're collecting and then lend them out and make money. You can lend, you can take deposits, but each of those has to be banked by a bank in the back end. You cannot basically kind of do the same things that a typical bank does. So I do think there are some business models that I think are harder to build, especially in the US. And by the way, if you go outside the US, you go to Latin America, you go to Europe, this is not true. Getting licensed as a bank is much easier. Whereas in the US, it's been, I think, 20 or 25 years since the last license was issued. So it's a much harder thing to get licensed as a bank in the US, as an example.
Okay. So basically what you're saying is, if I'm a e-commerce or a SaaS application provider, these companies have made it easy for me to just focus on my core business and not worry about the way the money comes in. But if you're in fintech, you need to worry about which phase you go in, right? That's what you're talking about.
That's right.
All right. So I want to talk about one more thing, which is it's a social issue when it comes to money and lending. So especially there's a lot of awareness now around, there is a history of discrimination in lending. There's the Fair Lending Act and so on and so forth, right? So that is that. And then there is this notion of, companies saying we're going to use AI ML to be able to make it easy for you to, get money, right? So my question to you is fintech, modern fintech with AI, ML, making it more of a level playing field for the society? Or is it, accelerating the bias, so to speak, or making it more pronounced? So how do you think about that? It's part technology, part social, but they all come together in fintech.
So it's actually a very interesting question, and to be honest, it's a evolving picture. There are two aspects here again that I think are important to consider. One is whether or not AI and ML is actually even being used in a variety of those kinds of applications, like lending decisions, like all these kind of things. The short answer is no, it's not. And the reason it's not is not because it would possibly make the products better or to make these systems function more efficiently. It's actually because there are very, again, strong regulations around disparate impact and others, which basically make sure that if you decline a loan to someone, that you can actually explain very, very clearly exactly what happened, why it was declined, or why somebody got a certain credit limit, and so on and so forth. Which means a rules-based system, which is almost the antithetical system to a AI ML-based system, is the more preferred model, because a rules-based system has very clearly defined rules, and you can actually see exactly which rule kicks something out or which rule kind of kicks something in. And so you can explain to a regulator exactly every decision, if any decision came up. Whereas in an AI ML-based system, it's much harder to pinpoint it. And also as it evolves, it changes so quickly that the decision made yesterday may not be the decisions made today. So if a regulator came in and started to look at it, it starts to become a lot harder to explain. So AI explainability, which is of some interest to some people, is actually critical in the space of using AI in financial services. The reason it's critical is because there's a regulatory need. You have to be able to explain every single output based on a single set of inputs, and do so, and basically we kind of look at it as an open box for any regulator that wants to look at it. Because that is not possible very well today, the use of AI in most of these situations is actually pretty minimal. Now, there are some players that you might actually see some of that stuff being used. And I do think, there's some catch up between regulators and the technology companies in use of some of these things. Some of that will get closed over time. But one of the things that you do have to worry about when it is legal is basically what I think of as like memorializing bias into models, right? Because models are simply learning from data. Exactly. And most of the data we have has inherent human biases in it. And like you saw in that model that they showed in San Francisco, the court system, sometimes, using a model sometimes just memorializes some of the biases we already have, right? Yeah. And so that's, in fact, almost automating and perpetuating bias rather than removing it.
So is there anybody who is trying to do the reverse of it with AI to say, hey, the data today is biased and that is reinforcing the prejudices of historical mistakes, but I'm going to go find new classes of data to make it a more level playing field for the people who have been discriminated all along to be able to get a fair shot at it? Is somebody doing the inverse of that?
I think it's too early, at least for financial services applications, to look that far. I think right now, as I mentioned, step one is what's being solved for, which is explainability. So can we get explainable models, even if they are slightly worse than unexplainable models in terms of performance, using explainable models that actually do better than rule-based systems, I think is kind of like the first effort. And if we can get there and actually start to put more of those into production and actually start using them to make decisions, then I think we'll come up with more data. I think the question that you're asking, which will probably be phase 2. Okay.
All right. So Preeti, quick time check. How much more time do I have?
Prakash, looks like there is a question from on the chat window. If you would like to take that, and we can wrap up after that.
Okay.
Do you want to read it out?
Yeah, can you please?
Yes. So Shwark, with COVID-19, cloud has advanced 5 years in a matter of 5 months. The advantages are obvious in hindsight, but what's next for cloud?
So I don't know if I would completely agree with the assertion that cloud has gone 5 years and 5 months. I do think utilization of more SaaS applications has gone higher. That is probably definitely true. I think in terms of looking at, the kind of what's next in cloud, the thing that we're as investors very bullish on is serverless, which was talked about in the prior section as well. The reason is, if you really think about the evolution of compute, the construct of the current, the way we think about AWS and Azure and GCP clouds is somewhat, a transitional kind of model, which is that there is in fact a compute that's moved from my data center managed by me to somebody else's data center managed by somebody else. Mm-hmm. What serverless does is kind of takes that all the way to the very end of the price efficiency optimization spectrum, where you're literally paying per actual computation, right? Rather than provisioning whatever you would have provisioned in your data center in the cloud. So I do think that there is a certain level of efficiency, and we actually believe that it actually will create new business models when you can actually price infrastructure and costs at such a smooth level. So there could be a very interesting thing that ends up happening there. So we're quite interested in the move that happens there. Now, as I said, I actually don't think the move to the actual use of the cloud has accelerated all that much, but it has definitely kind of taken on a little bit more of an importance, and we actually see in the long run, the next 5 to 10 years, serverless being very interesting.
Thank you, Shak. That does seem like, cloud never leaves, right? It was there 20 years ago, and it will be 20 years from now.
That's right. That's right.
Before you exit, one quick open-ended question for you. What are the areas you're focusing on currently for your in terms of investment?
So I'd say the core things that I'm most interested in, the bulk of what I put my time into is still in fintech and infrastructure. So I'm looking at primarily more infrastructure fintech. I really like this plumbing layer that's enabling this next generation of innovation that actually can be unlocked. So anybody that's building infrastructure for financial services innovation, I'm also interested in companies that are then plugging into that infrastructure, like these SaaS applications that are re-energizing or rethinking business models by coming up with new products and services. All of those kinds of things are where I'm spending a lot of time. On Devops, as I said, I'm quite interested in things around the Jamstack and APIs. So basically looking at a variety of different APIs. In fact, the fintech infrastructure is all APIs as well. So, but that same model being applied to other kinds of things. And so we're investors in things like Gatsby and serverless and a bunch of other things that are in that bucket. So that's another area of things that I'm quite interested in.
Cool. All right. So for the folks who are listening, who are looking for investment in fintech infrastructure, and I think you can convince Schwark to do some security investments as well. I've seen him do that. He's at Trinity with his checkbook. And thanks, Schwark, for joining us. And thank you, Preeti and Tycon, for this opportunity. And thanks, everyone, for making the time.
Thank you, Prakash. Really appreciate you doing this. And thank you, Schwark. It was a very lively conversation. Really appreciate it.